This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. Parshas Yisro. We're continuing on in our voyage about the discussion of the two different types of tefillin. Tefillin of Rashi, tefillin of Rabenu Tam. Don't worry, we're not finished yet, but a lot of excitement to come. And this morning, by way of introduction, we're going to start with none other than, pick your lucky number. We're going to go with number 44 this morning. We're going to start with number 44. And, the Pasuk says in Tehillim. Actually, before we get there, I'll tell you why we're going to number 44. There was a shaila raised to the Shas HaTshuvos Knesset Yecheskel, Rabbi Cheskel Katzen Ellenbogen. And somebody wanted to try to be machriya, to try to come up with proofs to one side of the machlokes between Rashi and Rabenu Tam. Again, refresh your memory. You look back on the second sheet. The opinion of Rashi is that if you were to look at the tefillin, you could read it, you could be kairei kesidron. On the left side of the wearer, which is the right side of the person looking at it, you have Kadesh Li, and then V'haya Kviyacha, which are in Parshas Boy, and then Shema Yisrael V'hayim Shamaya. So if you would be reading it, if you'd be facing the tefillin wearer, you could read it in order that it appears in the Torah, as opposed to the opinion of Rabenu Tam. Rabenu Tam Shita is what? Havayos be'emtza, the two V'hayas are in the middle, Kadesh V'haya Kviyacha on the left side of the wearer, followed by V'hayim Shamaya and Shema Yisrael. By the way, I'll just point out, there's a third shita, there's a shita of the Ravid, who's not on the sheet. The Ravid agrees with Rabenu Tam that it's Havayos be'emtza, but instead of Kadesh Li being on the left side of the wearer and Shema Yisrael being on the right side of the wearer, it's vice versa. Actually, you'll see, in total, how many different opinions of tefillin are there? 64 opinions of tefillin. So if you want to be yotzei all the shitas, it's not so easy. You want to say, I'll be machmer. It's not the easiest thing to be machmer on. So you could have a guy who's machmer on his tefillin, but he could, be spending the whole day wearing different tefillin. I mean, it's going to cost him, a good $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year, or just a one-time purchase, actually, But if he loses track of what's what, now it get a little complicated. Okay, but if you want to be yotzei all the shitas, you only need 64 pairs of tefillin, even more than Mar Makomis on the no, we have more Mar Makomis on the sheet. Okay, so that's, but the two main opinions are Rashi and Rabenu Tam. And the question was raised to Rabbi Cheskel Katzen Ellenbogen in the Knesset Yecheskel. Somebody wanted to bring a raya to one of the shitas. He wanted to bring a raya to the opinion of Rabenu Tam. To which the Knesset Yecheskel says, look at number 45, Ahuvi Talmidi, my beloved student, Timihani, I wonder, Eich Maleis Libcha, how you could fill your heart with the gall, Linoit Sipayren Ben Aryeh, Velavi, to get in between the lion and the lioness. You want to stick your head, you want to stick your neck in between these two powerful forces, Befrat, Kikal Hagoin Marishanim Lo Yechriyu. Even the earlier sources were not decisive. The Rush was nastapik. The Rambam, the Rajba, the Rabbeinu Chananu was like Rashi, Rav Haigun was like Rabbeinu Tam. So who do you think you are to stick your neck in between this big machlekes? And then says the Knesset Yecheskel, don't you know what the Megala Mukos says? What does the Megala Mukos say? Megala Mukos quotes a pasuk in Tehillim. Look at number 44. Vayavar v'hine einenu. He passed by, and it wasn't there anymore. Va'avak sheyu. I searched for it. V'lei nimtza. Shamar Tam, guard the Tam. Urei Yashar, see the Yashar. Ki acharis le'ishalom, the end will be a man of peace. And we've already been introduced to Rabbeinu Tam's opinion. We've been introduced to Rashi's opinion. There's a third opinion. That's the opinion of the Shimusha Rabbah. Shimusha Rabbah has another way to put on tefillin, another way of the order. And the Shimusha Rabbah was called the Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. Says Megala Amukos, all of these three pairs of tefillin are alluded to in the pasuk. Shemar Tam. Who was that a remez to? Rabenu Tam. Urei Yashar. Yashar is backward Rashi. Ki acharis, but when Mashiach comes, you're not going to wear not Rashi, not Rabenu Tam, you're going to wear the tefillin of Shimush Rabbah, who is called the Sar Shalom, Ki acharis le'ishalom. So here you have a remez in Tehillim already to the three different main pairs of tefillin. So says the Knesset Yecheskel, you think you're going to be machriya in the machlokes Rashi Rabenu Tam? No, it's already Yisudasam al Harei Kodesh. It's already founded on already in Tehillim. You see a remez to all three pairs of tefillin. Okay, so we want to discuss this morning is how in the world did this machlokes start between Rashi and Rabenu Tam? Moshe Rabenu came down from Har Sinai. Presumably he told Klal Yisrael that the way you put on tefillin, Kadesh, v'haya kiviyacha, Shema, v'hayim Shemaya. And at which point, 600,000 men, every male over the age of 13 started to wear tefillin. So you had probably over 1 million people wearing tefillin. At that point in time, you could have easily opened up anybody's tefillin and seen what it said in the Parshas. In the next generation, you could have easily opened up any pair of tefillin and see how did it happen that some people started putting the Parshas in one way and some people started another way. How did it happen? Why at any point in history we could have easily opened up tefillin and see what are the Gedolei Yisrael doing? What kind of machlokes is this? And if we could add, if you take a look in number 28, this comes from the approbation, the haskama of the Sefer Divrei Yisrael from the Kloisenberger Rebbe, and he adds another question, and that is, there's a famous comment of the Rambam that there's no machlokes about tradition. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. You ever see some Hasidim, they wear black tefillin, some of them wear purple tefillin. I mean, it's unheard of. When it comes to a matter of Kabbalah, a matter of Messiah, there is no machlokes at all. The only time you have machlokes in halacha is when it's a matter of shikol hadas, when it's a matter of evaluating various logics. So now if it's a matter of the thought process, one person may tend to think one way, and another person may tend to think another way. In other words, you could understand that if it's a matter of svara, if it's a matter of logic, in the early generations where the minds were pure and clear, the logic was ironclad. And as the minds weakened slightly, so then at a certain point in time, some people thought one way and some people thought another way. But nobody argues that tefillin is black. Nobody argues that the black side of the ritzu is on the outside. Nobody argues that the tefillin are on the left arm. You can't argue about that. It's not a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of tradition. The Rambam says any matter of tradition there's no machlokes about. Nobody argues if the sukkah, everyone agrees. You put the schach on the top of the sukkah, not on the bottom of the sukkah, because at any point in our history you could just look, what are people doing? So if there's no machlokes about divrei Kabbalah, then how could there be a machlokes about the tefillin of Rashi, the tefillin of Rabenu Tam? This is not subject to dispute. You can't argue about this. Okay. So we're going to examine today 3 basic approaches to how this machlokes developed. The first one is a little bit startling. It's a little bit uneasy. Doesn't make you feel that good. And that is, maybe there was a time in our history where the observance of the mitzvah of tefillin was not so strong.
What? Yes.
And maybe it was not so common and there weren't so many people actually wearing tefillin. And because of that, there was somewhat of a weakening in the tradition of the wearing of tefillin. Say, how could you say something like that?
Right.
Well, if you look at number 24, the Eshel Avram from Buchach, the Eshel Avram, Rabbi Shlomo Warman, who lived in this neighborhood, was a direct descendant of the Eshel Avram from Buchach. I once saw in his house, he had in his living room a big yichus brivel, dating him back to the Eshel Avram. His last name, Eshel Avram's last name, I think, was Warman also. Yeah. And he writes on the 6th line, Ukenira she'ikar ha'plukta haisa bizmanim. This machlokes was at a time she'hanachas tefillin roifefes ba'amanei Yisrael, where the wearing of tefillin was very flimsy, was very weak among Klal Yisrael. B'dor Sahem. Who wore tefillin sherak yechidei segula b'dar hayamanichim? Only the Gedolei Hadar wore tefillin. Ukedamashma midivrei kol hakadmonim, says the Eshel Avram. If you look in the words of all the Rishonim, this is clear. She'ad doiro shel harash, that until the generation of the Rush, only the Gedolei Yisrael wore tefillin. So if you want to know, what does tefillin look like? So I go to my friend Yankel, let me open up your tefillin. He says, what's tefillin? You go to your friend, your local observant Jew. He says, "Look, I keep Shas. I don't wear tefillin." Now then, you go to the Gadol Hadar. Gadol says, "You're not touching my tefillin. You want to open up my tefillin? I'm not gonna. I need to wear them."
Rabbi, it's hard to believe.
I hear it.
It's hard to believe.
I hear it. This is what he says, right? And we'll see.
I believe that, but it's hard.
Right? And he says, "V'ulai gam doros hasmuchim achar kach."
When is the rush?
Until the time of the rush.
We'll see what happened. We'll see what happened.
No, when did the rush live up then?
The Rosh was one of the Rishonim. The Rosh was a Talmud of the Maram Meirotenberg.
Yeah.
So we're talking 13th century. 13th century.
13th century.
Right?
13th
So what?
13th century.
Yeah?
100 years ago, in other words.
A long time ago, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah?
Why would it be hard to believe? Because out of every mitzvah that we have, it would seem to me that tefillin are one of the most difficult things. If somebody if you didn't have tefillin, if you didn't have a gift world to go to make a pair of tefillin, and how in the midbar, let's say even after Moshe, how they came up all of a sudden with 200,000 pairs of tefillin. But to make tefillin, especially with the Hidurim that we have today, to make them gossip, to make them square, to make them black, how did people do it?
Okay, but you would think, go to any rabbi and ask them, what did it have in your tefillin? Tell me what it says in your tefillin.
But how the mice actually make them?
How did they make it? You know, they said, it was difficult to make. They figured it out. I mean, we learned that when the Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, they took the hides of the Korban Pesach and they made the tefillin out of it. Look, I can't make a pair of tefillin, but
To get the hides,
I don't think it's rocket science, you know?
but it is a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, lahavdil, and make anything out of it, to make a wallet out of leather. I can't do it. I don't know if you could do it, but I don't think it's considered, you don't have to be a neurosurgeon to be able to make a wallet. You know, they ship it, they outsource it to, third world countries, and they have it down pat. It's not harder than making a pair of Nikes, right? That it costs them 4 cents to manufacture. Yeah. I hear look. Apparently from the time of the Rosh and on, everyone wore it. So, and look what he says. He says, "V'ulei gam doros hasmuchim achar kach." Even the generations in close proximity afterwards, shekasav lahedya derech zchus almaniyim alanicham, that they wrote some kind of justification why many people were not wearing tefillin. In other words, many of the Rishonim are struggle to explain, but the Gemara says that if you're a body that doesn't wear tefillin daily, then you could end up in a very bad place in the next world. So they explain they didn't do it because they were worried that their guf would not be naki. But in any event, we see Sharoiv Am B'nei Yisrael Loy Hayu Manichim Az. The Eish Avram says the majority of the Jewish people were not wearing tefillin. I mean, today that's the same thing. The majority of Klal Yisrael doesn't wear tefillin, but there are millions of Jews that do wear tefillin. But it seems like from the Eish Avram, now in times of the 13th century, you didn't have Reform, conservative, and non-observant.
No.
Either you were or you weren't. A Jew was a Jew. But it's a very striking, startling thing that the Eish Avram is reporting that the majority of Jews in the early Rishonim, they were not wearing tefillin.
Does that mean Rabbi also didn't daven 3 times a day at that time?
No. They kept Shabbos, they kept Yom Tif, they learned, they were tzitzis, they were Mesech Das from Talmud Torah, even Daled Amos. There was one particular mitzvah that they were not zahir in, and that's a mitzvah of tefillin. We'll see why.
So what generation is the Rosh is the Eish Avram talking about?
He's saying until the generation of the Rush. You'll see. You'll get a better picture for
Rashi
when.
and Rabenu time were before Rush.
Correct.
They were about 100 years.
So, right. In other words, if this is true, this would explain how machlekes like this developed. If tefillin was a rare commodity, if it was not an everyday occurrence where you saw, in other words, if only the Rav of the city was wearing a pair of tefillin, so you could understand how machlekes like this could develop. He says, "Shemavur mizeh sharoiv am b'nei Yisrael hamanicham az." Why? Mitzarat tiltul. It could have been because of the constant expulsions and exiles, and mitzad miyat b'nei Torah, and could be because there were many learned people, but there were many people who were not learned, and maybe it's because they held you need a guf naki, and they were choishesh for the tara of the tefillin. But in any event, it could be that tefillin was not such a common commodity. If you look in the Meiri in Masechta Brachas Yadalad Amud Beis, look what the Meiri writes. Ma shabiarnu shahadvarim amurim b'misha meiko b'anachas tefillin. This that the Gemara says, that if you don't put on tefillin, you don't come out of Gehenna after 12 months, that's derech piruk al mitzvahs. This is only if the reason you don't wear tefillin is because you're casting off the yoke of heaven. But there are people that are nimna, they refrain from the mitzvah for a different reason. V'hushes hat tefillin tzrichim guf naki. Tefillin needs a clean body. You have to be careful not to fall asleep in tefillin. You have to be careful not to divert your attention from tefillin. You have to be careful not to involve yourself in any dirt. Tzitzis you don't have to have a guf naki. Tzitzis you're allowed to take into the Beis HaKisei.
You wear it?
Of course, you take it into the Beis HaKisei. Even a talis, it's not osir, it's just not derech kavod because it's miyuchad l'tfila. But there's no Indian of guf naki and tzitzis. But he says, "Uvetalmud hamarav hiskir b'mikzas chamshay nisham shle'anichem ela b'yom yidum mashana." There were many early sages. They would only wear tefillin on special occasions, not regular people. Early chachamim. V'haya b'hayami. There are some people. Shaloi haya manicham ela achar shabo alav yisurim b'nisrape. There's some people. They only would wear tefillin if they were at a near-death experience and then God would heal them. Why? Because they held like this. That as long as a person has the filth of sin, he can't wear tefillin. But if God visits punishment on him and then heals him, so now he's been cleaned from his sins, so now his body has been cleansed, then he could wear tefillin. And
this was the rationalization that people didn't wear tefillin.
This is what they held. This is what they held, the halacha. And they brought a smichos, they brought a raya from the psukim. The psukim say, "Haroifi l'chol tachluoichi." God heals all of our illnesses. Hagoyo mishachas chayoichi. He redeems us from the pit. Hama'at shreichi chesed v'rachamim. And only then does He crown us. So from here is a proof that you can only put on the crown of tefillin if God has healed you from your illness. Listen to this. Uktsas chachamim. There were some chachamim noyagim lahanicham b'yamim shvein Rosh Hashanah l'yom HaKippurim. There were some sages, they only wore tefillin 7 days a year. Aseres Yimei Tshuva. So you want to know, well, just open up a pair of tefillin and check. Well, it may not have been as common as we may think. If you look in the Smag, Rav Moshe of Kusi, who wrote a Sefer HaMitzvos, in the year 1236 he traveled through Provence and Spain, rebuking the masses for not wearing tefillin. That was his big campaign. Rav Moshe of Kusi walked through Provence, walked through Spain. He says, "Kach darashti Parshazu b'golios Yisrael lahichiach shekol echad v'yachad chayiv b'tefillin." Right? Imagine if you got word. Chaim Kanievsky is coming to America to tell frum Jews to wear tefillin. What do you mean? Who doesn't wear tefillin? We don't need him for that. But Rav Moshe of Kusi, on Gedolei Hadar, he had to rebuke the masses. They weren't wearing tefillin.
Listen, there were a bunch of in the United States to tell the Jews to be Shomer Shabbos.
Yeah.
That was before my time.
Yeah. So look what he says in the last paragraph. He says that he gave a big drasha. Vayhi achar arba alafim u'tisha me'os v'tishim v'chamei shanim. It was in the year 4995. That's the year 1235. Lebrias Olam. Haisasiba min hashamayim. I had siyata d'shmai lohichiach to rebuke the people. Uvishnas taf kuf tzadik vav, and in 1236, Hayisi b'Sfard, I was in Spain, and I rebuked them. And after my rebuke, there was a massive earthquake, and that shook up the people. No pun intended. And my words had an impact. They were scared. They were scared from the
earthquake,
seismic effect of my drasha, and it had an impact. And he writes, and Baruch Hashem, his drasha was accepted. So it could very well be that one of the reasons how this machlekes developed is because, as we see from the Smag, as we see from the Meiri, as we see from the Eish Avram, the mitzvah of tefillin was a mitzvah that was not always observed the way it is today. And if you ask, how could it be that such a mitzvah is not carefully observed? Well, the Gemara in Shabbos says that that any mitzvah that Klal Yisrael is not moiser nefeshan b'shas hashmad, adayin hi refuya b'yadam, it's still weak in our hands, and the Smag applies this to the mitzvah of tefillin as well. Okay, so that's pshat number one. Now this is not really a comfortable explanation. It doesn't really make you feel that confident to say that there was such a period in time where there was such a lack of observance. I mean, okay, but there were tefillin. I mean, Gedolei Yisrael wore tefillin, so open them up, see what they have, and then everyone else should follow suit. So we have another explanation over here, and that is...
Shabbos wasn't a problem. Tefillin was the problem.
Tefillin was a problem. Either they were afraid of not having a guf naki, not having a clean body, or whatever the rationalization was.
It would also seem that if they were Gedolim who needed it, even if they had spar not to, if a Rov didn't wear it, that the Masorah would still be passed on by even if people didn't have it themselves. We learn Kachin today. There are people who
learn it, right?
Who know it, even though we're not bringing Kabbalah.
Right? But this may help with the explanation, and it seems like the Eish Avram is saying this is when the machlok is developed. Okay, here is another explanation. The explanation of the Michtam Eliyahu, Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, in Chelek Daled. Dessler, Chelek Daled, page Nunvav.
He was a Rav in England.
Yeah. Okay, and he says the following. He says, there's an expression, yeah? Minog Yisrael, Torah, right? The custom of Klal Yisrael is Torah. It's not exactly Torah, he says. Not Minog Yisrael Torah. Minog Yisrael is Torah's minhag. That means when Klal Yisrael has a custom, it has status. It has the status of Torah's minhag. But it does not yet have the status of Torah Shabbal Peh. What's Torah Shabbal Peh? Torah Shabbal Peh is one of two things. I have a tradition from my father, that he has a tradition from his father, that he has a tradition from his father, that Moshe told Klal Yisrael on Har Sinai, this is the way it needs to be. And this is the pasuk that it's learned down from. Now, do we still have that today? We have whatever it says in the Gemara is Torah Shabbal Peh. Whatever, does it say in the Gemara, I can or can't eat gebrux? No, that's just custom. Do I have to keep my custom? You have to keep your custom. Your custom has your custom has the status of minhag, but it doesn't have the status of halacha. A minhag has the status of minhag, it doesn't have the status of halacha. Halacha is only if it could either be traced back from father to son back to Har Sinai. Nobody could say, yeah, I have a tradition back to Har Sinai, I do or don't eat gebrux. It's a minhag, a more recent custom. Tefillin being black, we have a tradition going back until Har Sinai, tefillin are black. Halach l'Moshe miSinai. What about when it comes to other things? What about when it comes to the order of the tefillin? When Moshe Rabenu came down from Har Sinai, Moshe Rabenu told Klal Yisrael, the order of tefillin is 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is how the pasuk is teaching it to you. So the first generation, they not only heard from Moshe Rabenu that this is the order of the tefillin, they also understood how we derive it from the psukim. The second generation understood how they derive it from the psukim. The third generation understood how they derive it from the psukim. For them, the order of the Parshas were halacha. But as the generations continue, all they knew was what the order of the Parshas was. But they no longer knew how to derive it from the psukim. If you would ask them, why do you do it? Kadesh, V'haya, Kivyacha, V'haya, Shemaya, or Shema, they would say, I'm not sure. I can't get it from the psukim anymore. I don't know exactly how you see it in the psukim. But I know this is what my father did. I'm not sure what happened before then. If you don't know exactly anymore how it's derived from the psukim, then what you're doing is no longer halacha, what you're doing is minhag. Comes Rabenu Tam. And Rabenu Tam says, if you knew how to get it from the psukim, I couldn't tamper with it. But if you don't know how you get it from the psukim, and I have a different way to read the psukim, and halacha is stronger than minhag, then I could change the accepted custom. and I'll tell you what to do. And I'm telling you, you're doing it wrong. So long as the Jews had a strong enough tradition where they could derive, where they knew how Moshe explained to Klal Yisrael how to get from the psukim, it's untouchable, it's halacha, it's halacha, it's Torah Sheba'al Peh. But if you don't know anymore how to hit it, how to get it, how to tap into the psukim, it's not minhag anymore, it's not halacha anymore, it's only minhag. Minhag! I can't change, you can't change, Rabenu Tam could change. Someone of that authority, who's able to go back into the Torah and read the psukim correctly, they could change the established custom. In other words, what Rav Dessler is identifying is that once Torah Sheba'al Peh is lowered to the status of minhag, then all it is a minhag. And someone as great like Rabenu Tam has the ability to challenge the accepted minhag if he is able to utilize Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nirashas for him and read the psukim in a more exacting way.
So it started with Rabenu Tam.
So what?
So it started with Rabenu Tam.
So according to the Michtam Eliyahu, and he doesn't say who changed Rashi or Rabenu Tam. He just says there was certainly one way that they did it, and at the time where it became unclear why they did it that way, at that point someone, either Rashi or Rabenu Tam, changed it.
How do we overlook the fact that the earliest generation, Moshe Rabbeinu himself, interpreted this way, and we may not have the interpretation or the understanding, but nevertheless, it carries down the way we do it.
Moshe didn't interpret it. Moshe didn't interpret it.
Whatever generation
Hashem
understood that they
Hashem
understood
explained it
right.
to him how to see it from the psukim.
So they understood it this way from the Pesukim, and the evidence of that is that's the way we do it. So this is a generation prior, a long time prior to Rabbeinu Tam
Correct.
or Rashi. How can we just overlook that and say Rabbeinu Tam has a new?
You mean if we know for sure
That this is the way
that it was interpreted this way, even though we don't know why it wasn't interpreted that way, why doesn't that carry more weight than Rabbeinu Tam's new interpretation?
It's like the line of Masorah is completely cut off.
Oh, it was cut off? Oh,
That's what it sounds like.
you might be right.
When
I
you're
have another
recreating
point.
the
You
way
might,
it's-
you might be right. You might
Which
be right.
tefillin the Hakadosh Baruch Hu will wear?
Rabbeinu HaKadosh Baruch Hu,
Yeah.
it seems like God wears Rabbeinu Tam tefillin,
Does
Yes,
he?
that's the tradition.
How do we know?
but that has no bearing on the halacha.
No.
But isn't it the way to wear it for Hakadosh Baruch Hu?
No, because Torah is loy b'shamayim hi. Well, we'll see for a moment. If you look very carefully in look at number 46 for a minute, right? The Gemara in Masechta Bracha says that tefillin the kuchabrichu maksive. What does it say in the tefillin of Hashem? So the Gemara says, first Parsha it says Kimi Goy Gadol, right? From Devarim Parak Daled in Parshas Aschanan. Umi Goy Gadol. That's the first compartment. And then it says Ashrecha Yisrael from Zois HaBracha. Then Oy Hanisa Lekim back to V'aschanan. Ulesitcha Elyoin back to V'aschanan. No. Ulesitcha Elyoin is, I think, Kisavoy. So you see, Rebbe Shalom's tefillin, it says various psukim, but they're out of order in the way it's written in Devarim. So the Sefer Sifsei Chachamim, Masechta Brachos. In other words, if in Rebbe Shalom's tefillin it's out of order, that's more indicative like Rabbeinu Tam's approach, more than like Rashi. Rashi learns HaKairei Kairei Kesidron. But in Rebbe Shalom's tefillin, it's more reflective of the approach of Rabbeinu Tam. But in any event,
But the raya is that all people wear Rashi. That's 100%. Excuse me. Some people wear tefillin, the Rabbeinu Tam also, which means that Rashi is the accepted way of wearing it. But some people prefer also to wear Rabbeinu Tam because they're not sure.
That's the whole
no. So we read the Rambam, right? The Rambam said that in his times, everyone was wearing Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin in Rambam land. Remember, we learned the Kesef Mishnah brought down that number 9. Kesef Mishnah said that
What caused that?
that in the place of the Rambam, everyone switched to Rabbeinu Tam, and then when the Rambam came to Eretz Yisrael,
Ramban? Rambam?
and he said when Rav Moshe Deri,
Maimonides,
when he came from the west to Eretz Yisrael, he had Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, and he had to throw it out. So, but there was a period of time where many people were wearing Rabbeinu Tam. But this idea of where the machlokes came from, or the Michtam Eliyahu's idea, is that so long as you know the source in the Torah B'chsav, why you're doing it, then what you're doing is not a minhag, it's halacha, it's Torah Sheba'al Peh. But if you lose the precise tradition of how to derive it from Torah B'chsav, it's no longer Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's no longer halacha, it's only minhag, and then a gadol hadar has a right to override and contravene the established minhag, to which Michtam Eliyahu says that's what happened with tefillin. Rabbeinu Tam came along, Rabbeinu Tam said, you have no idea why you're wearing Rashi's tefillin. I do know that it should not be this way. And maybe, now what would Rabbeinu Tam say? Would Rabbeinu Tam say, well, and therefore it must be that 1,000 years ago they did it my way? Or does Rabbeinu Tam have the right to say, even if in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu they didn't do it my way, but if right now we don't know why, and according to the way I see things, it's the other way, I mean, that would be very difficult to say. Rabbeinu Tam's case would have to be that, look, if you don't know why you're doing it, I know it should be the other way, and it must be that something went wrong.
He
Nothing else like that.
He
Is there anything else in
disputed.
our halacha like that?
I think what we're saying is the Gadol Hador has a right to see Torah his way and apply it.
Yeah, but only if
Right.
only if the sources have become dull.
Right. So it's
But
open to interpretation again.
It's open to re-examination. In other words, once nobody could pinpoint why, it's open to re-examination.
That's when there's 64 versions.
There's 64 versions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mathematically,
Okay. Rabbi saying here is another possibility for how the machlokes developed, and this is more of the Kabbalistic approach and the approach that the Sfardim take, and that is also the Hasidim. Look at number 28. The Kloisenberger Rebbe said he heard from his Zayda, the Divrei Chaim. They asked the Divrei Chaim. Look at number 28. He says, "Uva al hagol yoynos mechidushay Torah mori b'chamizal roisi b'simchat deishav al mechkar." My father-in-law was investigating Masay Nisoira Hashailim Lahaniach Tfilin Kedas Rashi Rabenu Tam regarding the question whether you should put on Rashi Tfilin or Rabenu Tam. The Eich Noagu Ad Yameim. What was the established custom? So says the Kloisenberger Rebbe, V'yeshot Tzayin Bazel. Let us write it. Masha Shamati Mikvoid Kedushas Adoinein Moin Rabenos Hadvarim Sheshama Mizikni HaKadosh Bal Divrei Chaim Zechusa Yogen Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. Somebody asked him, Eze Tefillin Hinichu Anshe Dar HaMidbar. Yeah? You're in the desert, you're in the Sinai desert, and you're walking through the desert, and the Jews are wearing tefillin. What kind of tefillin do they wear in the Midbar? But that's, what kind of tefillin? Says the Divrei Chaim, V'al Asar Heshiv, he answered on the spot, Shehinichu Shnei Zugais. They wore 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time.
Wow. Because they weren't sure.
That's not the end of the story.
Okay, now I'm not even telling you the end of the story yet. I'm not ready. That's what he said on the spot. That they wore 2 pairs of tefillin. So if you take a look, and look at number 29, in the Gemara Menachos, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara says like this. Tanu Rabbanan, Chavivin Yisrael, Klal Yisrael's beloved, Shesivivan HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'mitzvahs. Hashem surrounded us with mitzvahs. How many? Tefillin b'roishen, tefillin on their heads. Utefillin b'zroyasen, tefillin on their arms. V'tzitzis b'bigdeyan, tzitzis on their garments. U'mezuzah liftischeyem, and mezuzah on their doors. So tefillin, tzitzis, mezuzah. Any accountants over here? Who could add up those? Tefillin, mezuzahs, yeah? Tzitzis. Who can add that up? 7. You're hired. Yeah? V'alei and Omar David. V'alei and Omar David.
7.
David said, Sheva b'yom hilalticha, I praise you with 7 ways. Well, 1 second here, We need an audit over here. Yeah? Tefillin, tzitzis, mezuzah. 7. So, says Rashi, Tefillin b'roish uvizraya, that's 2. You have the head and the arm is 2. Arba tzitziyos is 4. Umezuzah is 7. Okay, not so bad. It's a good defense, right? You have 2 pairs of tefillin, you have 4 tzitzis, and you have 1 mezuzah. So comes along the Ben Ish Chai Ben Yoyada, and he says the Marsha has a very strong question here. Yeah, tefillin, shel rosh, tefillin, shel yad are two different mitzvahs. You make two different brachas. But tzitzis is 4 mitzvahs. You make 4 brachas of tefillin. When you wake up in the morning, you say, Al mitzvah tzitzis, Al mitzvah tzitzis, Al mitzvah tzitzis.
So far I don't.
No, you don't do that. Right? You ever see anyone do that? Nobody does it. Tzitzis is 1 mitzvah. How could you count tzitzis as 4 different mitzvahs? Says the Ben Ish Chai, I would answer the question differently. We already learned the Gemara in Eruvin, I believe, that there's a place on the head and the arm for how many pairs of tefillin? 2 pairs of tefillin. And that's a reference. Why do you need a place on your head for 2 pairs of tefillin? Because tefillin of Rashi and tefillin of Rabenu. Tam, right? The Gemara in Eruvin in number 19, Kedamar of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Makam yesh b'roy sharoy laniach v'shtei tefillin. So therefore, says Ben Yoyada, you know what the 7 mitzvahs are? Number 1, mezuzah. Tzitzis is 2 mitzvahs. The lavan and the tchelas. And then Rashi tefillin head and arm, and Rabenu Tam tefillin head and arm. Those are the 7 mitzvahs. That's what the Ben Ish Chai says in the Ben Yoyada. And, says, now listen to what he writes. You want to know when Jews started wearing Rabenu Tam tefillin? The Nerali b'siyata d'shmaya. Minyan hasheva hukach. This is the minyan of 7. Damru b'Gemara. The Gemara in Eruvin says, Sadikei makam yesh b'rosh laniach by based tefillin. There's a place on the head for 2 pairs of tefillin. Mefurash b'zayah chadash. It's explicit in the Zayah Dilu based tefillin. Achas keseder Rashi v'achas keseder Rabenu Tam. The Zayah says there are 2 kinds, Rashi and Rabenu Tam, Tarbayot Tzrichi. And we need both of them. Why? Not because we're Mesupik, Kabbalistically. This is what the Sfardim hold. This is what the Chasidim hold. That there's a Kabbalistic reason to wear both, like we learned from the Shasachus Min HaShamayim, that God responded, Elu ve'elu divrei lekim chayim, v'lav mishum safek, and that's what the Arizal says, Nimsa miyamois Moshe Rabenu olav hashalom hayamanichem beizugais. From the time of holy Moses, they wore 2 pairs of tefillin. Veheim beis mitzvahs. These are 2 separate mitzvahs. Shein ma'akvas zu azu. V'yad v'rosh harei arba mitzvahs. So you have 2 on the head, 2 on the arms. Tzitzis is 2, lavan and chelas. And you have mezuzah. Those are the 7.
Could it be that it says v'hayu la'ot alecha means v'hayu is rabim? As opposed to v'hayu la'ot alecha?
It's I think it's referring to the 4 Parshas in the Tefillin. What? Still 4 different Parshas. It's not on 4 different cloth, but it's on 1 cloth. In other words, it's still 4 Parshas written. So V'hayu, the simple meaning is if you want to darshan that it's going on Rashi and Rabenu Tam, I don't think there's a chiyuv dar. Maybe it's a remez. V'hayu, the simple interpretation of the pasuk.
What means also tutafot? What is the word tutafot?
Tutafot. So we said there are 2 interpretations. Either tat in Caspian is 2, pat in African is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, or it's a language of the head, that area of the head.
Tutafot is also rabim, right?
Yeah, because they're 4 again. Because they're 4 parshios. They're 4 parshios. Okay, so that's what the Ben Ish Chai is saying, that from the times of Moshe Rabenu until today, or until his time, Klal Yisrael wore 2 pairs of tefillin. So this would be a very reasonable explanation for how the machlek is developed. It could be for many thousands of years Jews wore 2 pairs of tefillin. Which one was the main one? What's the nafkamina? Which one's the main one? I'm wearing both of them. And then, as the generations got weaker, and we can only wear the one which were Yotzei Meikar Hadin, we can't wear 2, it's too hard to wear 2, so now we have to pick one. Which is the primary one? I don't know. Rashi says my tefillin, Rabenu Tam says his tefillin. You want to know, well, why couldn't we ever open up a pair of tefillin and see what people are doing? You know why? Because they wore both. That's why you couldn't open up a pair and see which one they're, because they wore both. That's what the Sfardim will say. So again, there are 3 explanations, 3 mahalchim, for how this machlokes developed. Number 1, there was a period of time where the mitzvah of tefillin was weak, and maybe because of that, it became a little bit unclear what's the proper way to wear the tefillin. Another way, like the Michtam Eliyahu says, that when it became fuzzy, so to speak, how we could read the psukim in terms of the order of the parashas, a Gadol Yisrael could come along and change the accepted custom. And the third mahalach is the Jewish people for many ages wore 2 pairs of tefillin.
According to the third Mahalach, why did we stop wearing two?
Correct. There never was a machlekes, but the machlekes was which is the more important one. When the Torah says wear tefillin, it didn't mean both. Maybe kabbalistically, nobody says midairaisa you have to wear 2 pairs of tefillin. Al pi Kabbalah maybe there's an inyan to wear 2. But which one is the one that you're yotzi with lahalacha? So for many thousands of years, what's an afkamina? You're wearing both.
Yeah,
Wasn't Rashi much bigger than the normal?
Was Rashi bigger than Rabbeinu Tam?
Sure, look, Rashi, the Gemara, Rashi and the Chumash. What does Rabbeinu Tam appear? He's got to be men of Chochmah b'minyan, no question about it.
I'll tell you a very big chiddush. The Ashkenazim hold that the greatest of all the Rishonim was Rabbeinu Tam. The Rosh writes that the Sfardim hold the Rambam was Gadol b'Chachma. The Ashkenazim hold Rabbeinu Tam was the greatest of all the Rishonim. And that's why we pass like Rabbeinu Tam over the Rambam.
What do they base this? What is this explanation?
The Rosh says he was Gadol b'Chachma of Amin. Look, I didn't give him a faher, but I'll accept the Rosh.
When I open up Chamshachum Shetor, I see Rashi. When I open up the Gemara, I see Rashi.
I hear.
Rashi.
Even besides that,
anywhere.
Besides that, Rashi, Rabbi Yosef writes this also. Rashi never meant that we should use his Peirosh halacha l'maisa. Rashi was writing the simple interpretation of the Gemara and the Psukim, but it's not meant that what the halacha psuka should be. Rabbeinu Tam, when he wrote Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam said what the psak is. Rashi, as great as he was, and according to the Arizal, he wrote a Baruch HaKodesh, but it wasn't meant as a halachic work. It was meant as a commentary. The Rambam wrote.
Rashi said that. I
don't know if Rashi said that. That's what Rabbi writes in his Chuvas, in his Klali Apsak. So that's a big chiddush, right? That the Ashkenazim hold Rabbeinu Tam was the Gadol b'Chachma of a minyan mikol harishonim. Look, Rabbeinu Tam had it in his. What? No, but it happens to be. We don't paskin like Rabbeinu Tam. We paskin like Rashi on this issue. Right, which is an interesting thing. You would think if Rabbeinu Tam is the greatest of all the Rishonim after this whole drasha, how Rabbeinu Tam is so great, you would think everyone would wear Rabbeinu Tam. We don't do that. Right? Every rule is meant to be. Right? There are all these exceptions. Here's the rule. Rabbeinu Tam says put tefillin this way, and we hold Rabbeinu Tam is the greatest of all the Rishonim, and we wear Rambam tefillin.
Rabbeinu Tam didn't wear Rashi?
Yeah, that's what? The irony is the Ashkenazim wear Rambam tefillin, and the Sfardim wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin.
Sfardim wear Rabbeinu.
Yeah.
More than Ashkenazim, sure. Sfardim, right? Many Sfardim wear. Not only that, many Sfardim wear 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time.
Right.
The Ben Ish Chai, the Ben Ish Chai recommends that the correct way the correct way to wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin is to wear Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam slightly higher.
Right.
That's what the Ben Ish Chai writes. Okay. So let's get more into the halacha l'maisa.
But that's not what Chacham just said.
No, well, I think we have it all here on the sheet. Okay, let's go a little bit further, and then we'll wrap it up, Mitzvah Hashem, next week. What number? You always ask good questions. Let's see, where are we up to? Okay, you know what? I want to tell you another thing. Look at number 49. There's another opinion, and that's the opinion of Rav Yosef Shol Halevi Natanzan, the Shoel Meshiv, Shal Tshuva Shoel Meshiv. My grandmother during the war, she was in a DP camp after the war with a woman, Mrs. Natanzan. Mrs. Natanzan was a direct descendant of the Shoel Meshiv. Right? He was Rav Yosef Shol Halevi Natanzan. She was also a direct descendant of the Yismach Moshe, and she had his gartel.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, he writes like this. Says the Rav Yosef
was not a title of an individual, it was a name?
The Shoel Meshiv is the name of his Shas Tshuva son. He was Rav of Lemberg, and he was one of the most prolific writers of Tshuvas. So he writes like this. He says, remember when they opened up the kever of Yecheskel Hanavi? Whose tefillin did they find in Yecheskel Hanavi's kever?
When they opened.
What?
When they opened it.
Not this week. Not this week. When did they open it? We opened it in the Shiur. Who brought it down? The Mordechai. Yeah. The Mordechai, good, right. So the Mordechai, quoted by the Jerisha, says they sent to Eretz Yisrael that the kever, they opened up the bima on the kever of Yechezkel and they found Rashi's tefillin. And the Jerisha says it's not a raya. You know why they found Rashi's tefillin? Because it was puzzle. Because Rashi's tefillin is supposed to be buried. We mentioned that many times, right? We mentioned that. So says Rabbi Yosef Shalolevi Natanzan, that's not. You know why they found Rashi's tefillin? It says like this, back in number 49. The whole Indian of Rabenu Tam tefillin, which we saw Al Pi Kabbalah, maybe is on a higher level than Rashi. You only wear Rabenu Tam tefillin in Eretz Yisrael, but not in Chutz La'aretz.
Really?
In Chutz La'aretz you can't wear Rabenu Tam tefillin. It has such. He says. V'sefer Divrei Shol la'agados hashas mehagoyin Rav Yosef Shol Halevi Natans on Kasav Megillah Tazayim v'Tefillin de Rashi noyeg bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. Rashi's tefillin is for Eretz Yisrael and Chutz la'aretz. Tefillin de Rabbeinu Tam ikar hamitzvah rak v'Eretz Yisrael. This could answer a lot of questions, especially why they found only Rashi's tefillin in Yechezkel's kever, because Yechezkel, of course, lived in Bavel. He didn't live in Eretz Yisrael, he lived in Bavel. So Yechezkel couldn't wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. But if they would have opened up the kever of I don't know, of what? Yirmiyah, where is he? Where Shmuel Hanavi maybe had 2 pairs of tefillin.
That's the opposite of what he brought down with the Kesef Mishnah. When the Rambam went to Eretz Yisrael, only...
Yeah. This is a different approach, right? So this approach is that in Eretz Yisrael there's more of an Indian Rabbeinu Tam. More archaeology. You ready? More archaeology. So recently, they found in the caves where the warriors of Bar Kokhba were fighting, they found some of the remains of the soldiers, as well as their tefillin. And you know what kind of tefillin they wore? Rabbeinu Tam tefillin.
He's a puzzle. No, they were wearing them. You said they were wearing them? You said they found...
They found Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. You said that they found...
They found the tefillin of the soldiers. Now, it could be that when Mashiach comes, there's an Indian, maybe we wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Now, the soldiers Bar Kokhba, they thought, already Mashiach tzaitim. So I can't tell you.
They thought he wasn't a Mashiach.
They thought he was Mashiach. But that's what he said. Look at number 50. In the footnotes on the Sefer, Shas Chuzman HaShemayim, published by Rabbi Margolios, he says, B'yamim ha'achroinim nizgalu b'ma'oros Eretz Yisrael, they found in caves, sridim atikim, old remnants mitkufas b'ayisheni. So now we're talking well before Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So certainly, not like Rav Dessler. Rabbeinu Tam changed the established custom. No, we see it didn't start with Rabbeinu Tam. Maybe to fit into Rav Dessler would say that the custom became established like Rashi. And Rabbeinu Tam said, we're not doing it right. Maybe we have to go back to something what they used to be doing. He says, Parshas Mesudaros Keshitas Rabbeinu Tam Harelanu Eidos Ne'emana. We see trustworthy testimony. Sha'oid b'tekufa kadumazu, that already in this earlier generation, Hoysa Nahuga Shitazu Kalaimar, Laya Rabbeinu Tam Chidesh Shita. This is not Rabbeinu Tam's innovation. Shaloi Hoysa Yadu Mikadin, that was not known until them. Kiyim Rabbeinu Tam Chizek Minag Elu Shasidru Havayis Emsa. Rabbeinu Tam didn't innovate it. Rabbeinu Tam formalized it. Rabbeinu Tam gave it koyach. Rabbeinu Tam legislated it. Okay. So this one is just to introduce Mirz Hashem for hopefully we could wrap this up next week. And that is the halach l'maisa. If you look at the language of the Shulchan Aruch at number 14, look at number 14. Shulchan Aruch writes in Siman Lamed Daled, how do you wear tefillin? He brings down the opinion of Rashi, Kaddish on the left of the wearer, followed by V'hoya Kviyacha, followed by Shema, V'hoyam Shemaya, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, it's V'hoyam Shemaya and Shema. What should you do? The Shulchan Aruch concludes Sif Aleph, Minag ha'olam karashi v'Rambam. Shulchan Aruch doesn't say Rashi and the Rambam are right. Shulchan Aruch says the minhag is like Rashi and the Rambam. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Yarei Shamayim Yatsa Yetzi Yidei Shneim. A God-fearing person should do both. Okay, so what about me? What about you? What? Right? A God-fearing person should wear 2 pairs of tefillin.
Right.
And not only that, he should wear both at the same time. V'yasa shtei zugos tefillin, v'yaniach shneim. and your kavanah should be the one that is really the ikar mitzvah. I'm yotzi my mitzvah with that one, and the other one will be just kiritzuis ba'alma, because there's enough room to put 2 pairs of tefillin. Says the Shulchan Aruch, v'yesh omrim she'im lo yuchal laniach bevas achas. If you can't wear 2 at the same time, then put on Rashi and make a bracha and wear it for Shema and Shemana Esrei. And after Shemana Esrei, put on Rabenu Tam and say Shema again.
Isn't that
That's what they do
people?
that.
That's what a lot of people do. It depends. Some Sfardim, some Hasidim do that. As far as I know, most Hasidim do that.
No bracha.
And
No bracha.
no bracha on Rabbeinu Tam.
No bracha.
As far as I know, most Hasidim do that, and many Sfardim do that. But there are Sfardim that do the preferable choice of the Shulchan Aruch, and that is to wear 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time. So we're looking around like, so what does that mean for us? Does that mean a Jew doesn't wear 2 pairs of tefillin is not God-fearing? No. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Lo yase kain, don't do this. Elami shemuchsuk umefursam b'chasidus, unless you are a well-known, established, pious person. If you're just a regular person like me and you, then you can't take it upon yourself to act so religiously and so piously in public. You say, why not? What's the big deal? It's a big deal. Because you want to be yotzei tefillin. What about anivos? What about humility? Humility. I want to do a mitzvah. Who says your performance of a mitzvah is more important than your character? Just the opposite. Your personal character comes before your religious observance. So says the Shulchan Aruch, if you are well known as a Gadol Yisrael, so nobody's going to look at you funny. Nobody's going to say, who do you think you are? But a regular person cannot do this. Cannot do this. Here's the question though. Should not do what unless you're muchzak and meforsim b'chasidus? Shulchan Aruch says, don't do this unless you're muchzak and meforsim b'chasidus. Does this mean don't wear Rabenu Tam tefillin at all unless you're a Gadol Adar? Or does this mean don't wear both at the same time unless you're a Gadol Adar? But even if you're not a Gadol Adar, you should still wear Rabenu Tam after the davening. So those who wear the tefillin after the davening, they say that when the Shulchan Aruch says, don't do this unless you're muchzak and meforsim b'chasidus, say, I'm not wearing both at the same time. I'm doing it after the davening. That the Shulchan Aruch never said. But the Vilna Gaon says, no. Lo yasa kain means, don't you dare put on Rabenu Tam tefillin unless you're a well-established Gadol Adar. But until then, you should not be wearing Rabenu Tam tefillin. Okay? And we'll finish it up next week. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.